Hey friends, sorry I'm a little late. I had more technical difficulties. That's going to be the name of the game here at World Maker Books. And just a quick intro. Thank you for choosing to come and watch us tonight. This is, as I said, World Maker Books. We are reading EarthSong Overture by Mark Wandry. This will be part 4. At the end of the series, we'll be giving away a couple of copies of this book. If you like what you're seeing here tonight, please click on the thumbs up button and subscribe to the channel and share with your friends. Sorry, I've got to adjust this camera here a little bit. There we go. That's a little bit better. Maybe. There we go. That's better. At any rate, we have read the first 3 sections of this book, and Mindy was just leaving Jake to go back into astronomy. She's also leaving her customs broker job. So we stopped at a scene break rather than at a chapter break. It is now 8:06, so we're going to go ahead and get started since I was a little late. Oh, signed copies. Yay, Mark. Good job. All right, let's go. We're back. Like I said, we're starting at a scene break. We're back in New York City with Victor. All right. The transformation of Victor's life could not have been more profound. In the weeks since he witnessed the angels in Central Park, the course of his life had altered in ways he couldn't have predicted. Anyone who had known him previously would have thought it impossible that he'd find God, or that God would find him. He sat at the end of the table in the diner on 47th and Lexington. With him were his 6 inner circle aides or disciples. Chief among them was his first follower, Duke, who'd saved him in the New York City lockup and was now his right-hand man. Together, they were the center of his church, believers and followers all. He had hundreds of followers. We have to get a place, Duke was insisting. Damn, Victor. We almost got arrested yesterday on Broadway for stopping traffic for 2 hours. Excuse me, sorry, I just ate dinner. I agree with you, brother, Victor said, but even in this heaven-forsaken place, a church is going to cost serious Benjamins. We're having a hard enough time feeding our people and sleeping in the Brooklyn Flophouse. We need to ask the faithful to turn out their pockets, said Mary. She'd been the first to join after Duke and Victor were released. By the time he'd studied the Bible enough to realize Jesus hadn't had any female disciples, Victor was way past the point of changing his mind. Mary wasn't her real name. All the disciples in Victor's inner circle chose new names. All except Duke, that is. Mary, the only white person in his inner circle and the best educated, came to them as a drug-addicted prostitute. I was a crack whore, she freely admitted. Before plummeting from the heights of Wall Street, she'd been a stockbroker. I've been chewing the numbers, and we need to start soliciting donations. Many of our faithful can't even feed themselves, Paul said. He was the humblest of Victor's followers, and had once been a Catholic priest. He didn't talk about his fall from grace, though his fondness for preteens meant you didn't have to think too hard about what might have happened. Many would not wish us to succeed in building a permanent church on the street. The speaker, Gabriel, could arguably be the one in Victor's flock who'd fallen the furthest. He was once an NYPD detective. He'd had a wife with expensive tastes, children, and a townhouse in Greenwich. To fund it all, he'd gone dirty. When internal affairs caught up with him, reporters were all over it, and his family left overnight. He'd been out of prison for a year and living on the street when Victor found him. You know the way of the street better than any of us, Victor said to Gabriel. I'm certain that among the various street ministries were considered less than legitimate. And the police are still looking for you, Gabriel said, and pointed a finger at Victor. He was a black man of average build, almost the same height as Victor, but with a presence that was naturally intimidating. Victor called it the cop walk. We have to keep spreading the word, their newest member said. When we talk, they listen. Kadru was the only one not born in the United States. She was a gorgeous Indian woman who had become part of the inner circle only 2 days before. Victor had invited her based entirely on the force of her personality and a fascinating connection with the angel of God. She preferred to call them avatars. People can't listen to the words of the avatars while standing in the streets and being watched by non-believers. Everyone nodded in agreement. She makes a good point, Duke said, taking a sip of soda. I can get us a place for only $500 a month, Gabriel said, over by the cloisters. Ooh, that's expensive territory, Mary said. It's an abandoned theater, Gabriel said with a shrug. They're going to tear it down or renovate it. The authorities haven't made up their minds yet. So the owner will take our money. Several nodded. That's almost all the money we have in our pockets, Victor pointed out. What happens next month when we ain't got the Benjamins? They were already hitting delis after closing for leftover chicken and day-old baguettes. Without drawing much attention to herself, Kadra got up and quietly walked out of the diner. Mary watched her leave the building and shrugged before returning to her coffee. It was moments like this when people were together, smoking cigarettes and drinking coffee, that her old desire for a hit was worst. She squeezed the edge of the table until it was the centaur angel Victor preached about. On a subject we can afford, she offered once her cravings had subsided, I've made considerable progress on our website. I can only do so much using the free domain name, and my time at the public library terminal is limited. But we're online. What did you call it? Victor asked. A lot of stuff with angels and God were already taken, so I was thinking about how Kadru keeps calling the angels avatars, and I decided to call it Followers of the Avatar. I hope you don't mind. The disciples looked at each other and started nodding. It had a nice sound and avoided any claim of being an official church that might incur the wrath of the established faiths. I think Kadru has named us, Victor said, and everyone smiled. Where is our newest member? She went outside a few minutes ago, Mary told them. On cue, the tiny Indian girl reappeared through the doorway. Her delicate featured face scanned the room as she walked toward them. She moved like a graceful image from the Kama Sutra as she headed for the table with a smile on her face. Victor has something to tell you, Mary told her. We've decided to call ourselves Followers of the Avatar, Victor told Kadru. Kadru looked taken aback. Then she smiled a tiny smile. She nodded slightly, then took an envelope from her coat and placed it on the table among their empty lunch plates and the unpaid bill. She gestured for Victor to take the thick envelope. Open it, Prophet, she urged. Victor took it. The envelope was surprisingly heavy. He opened it and found a thick stack of $20 bills. He guessed there were about 100 of them. Too large. Where did this come from? Gabriel asked, his natural police instinct coming forward. The avatars have provided it, she said with a shrug and a sly smile. Okay, Victor said, giving her an appraising look. Thanks to the avatars, we have a start. He turned to Gabriel. Tell your contact we'll take the building. He counted out 50 of the bills and handed them to Gabriel without a second thought. You know this is completely under the table, Gabriel warned him. The law could come down on us at any point. We need some documentation to make it at least nominally legal, Mary said. Gabriel considered and shrugged before nodding. I can probably get at least that much. Besides, I have a contact in the housing authority. We'll be good for a few months. That should be enough. We don't need all that long. Why not? Paul asked. Victor considered for a moment. I think it will all be over by then. Victor ordered a round of milkshakes in celebration of their new name and soon their church building. Everyone was talking excitedly about how they could accelerate their outreach program and help the new faithful with the facility. As they celebrated, Victor looked down at the envelope in his hand. It was the same kind of envelope some ATMs dispense with large withdrawals. Without a word, he slipped it into his coat pocket and sipped his milkshake. Chapter break here. Alicia Benjamin pushed the number 7 on her phone's keypad, deleting the last message. She tossed it onto the couch beside her, made a note in the tablet, then the pencil and paper followed the phone, and a sigh followed that. She got up and went to the kitchen where the teapot was whistling. She'd received 2 crank calls, 8 requests for interviews by the typically confrontational British tabloid media, a notification of a canceled field trip, and an offer of a bus trip for tourists. Going public with her LM-245 sighting, the tourist traffic had exploded. Then, as the WAA weighed in, accusing her of fraud, it had all but died. Her tiny observatory had long depended on the minuscule donations she got from such visitors. A few pounds here and there paid the bills that she couldn't pay on her modest pension. The ridicule of the press had chased away almost all her tourist business. Now even the schools were staying away. Her frustration with the World Astronomy Association, of which she'd been a lifelong member, was unbelievable. Local astronomer is a charlatan, read the Southampton Daily Echo. She angrily poured boiling water into a chipped cup and added a tea bag. Bloody bastards, she growled. Taking the tea outside, she began opening the observatory for the night. The forecast was for clear skies, and she was eager to find an old friend. Trouble was, it should have returned days ago. Once she was ready, the telescope began sweeping the distant horizon. Due to the time of year, only a couple hours of observation were possible. The edge of the view was hazy from light pollution, but it was the best she could do. During the day, she used the Americans' Soho Observatory. Located in deep space, it watched the sun 24 hours a day, looking for solar phenomena. But it was also useful in spotting celestial bodies, particularly those close to the sun. The telescope's high-resolution images were available to anyone with an internet connection. Alicia punched data into her telescope's computer controls, and the motors whined as the scope moved. An area only 2 degrees from the now-set sun came into view. April 10, 8:49 p.m., she spoke into her digital recorder. Observation for LM-245 at expected coordinates continues. Its transition from behind the sun should have occurred 3 days ago. The asteroid should transition Earth orbit in perihelion on July 9. Alicia opened her old laptop and activated the instant messaging program. Are you there, Miss Patoy? Mindy is fine, the reply came from almost halfway around the world. Any sign yet? Not yet, Alicia typed. I'm going to run the coordinates you suggested now. Understood, standing by. Alicia entered the coordinates suggested by the American astronomer. She was familiar with Mindy Patoy's story. She'd watched it unfold from afar, then listened to the alien signal and hoped it was genuine. When the WAA discredited her, Alicia got her first taste of betrayal from that organization. It wasn't as if they proved Mindy wrong. She just wasn't able to provide enough evidence to back up her assertion. The telescope stopped and focused. It was very close to the horizon. The image was terrible. She fed the captured images into her computer. Nothing. I can't see anything, she typed. Can you send us the images? Sure, Alicia typed. She made a dozen digital images and sent them through the internet. They arrived at her new friend's computer in moments. Got it. Please stand by. I only have visibility on the coordinates for another 40 minutes. Understood. Alicia sipped her nearly cold tea as she waited. I think we have it, the screen displayed, causing her heart to race. Focus on the following grid reference of your reception point. Alicia typed in the correction, double-checked it, and pushed the Enter key. The telescope motors moved fractions of a millimeter. She pushed in the focus and looked at the image. There, in the center of her view, was the potato-shaped asteroid she'd last seen many weeks ago. Bloody hell, she whispered, then typed. That's it. Good show. She took more than 100 sightings, zooming out to match stellar details of LM-245's surroundings until it fell below the horizon and out of view. Sending you the data, she typed. Can you plot it? With only 30 minutes, I don't think so, but we'll take a shot at it. Good job, Alicia. Thanks. No, she typed back. Thank you. Ironic, isn't it? What's that? Mindy asked. That 2 disgraced astronomers from halfway around the world are helping each other. It sure is. We're going to study the data and prepare a press announcement. We'll let you see it so you can agree when we're done. Good night. Night, she typed back and shut down the computer. Inside, she had some good wine she'd put back. She decided it was time to open that bottle. Chapter break. New chapter, chapter 5. April 20th. Asteroid appears as planned, read one of the headlines on his tablet. Billy Harper swiped the screen with his finger and moved to another page. He wasn't very interested in a story about some whack job astronomer from Britain claiming aliens were moving asteroids around. He usually read the sports section, a few of the comics, and the local news, then went about his business. I gotta breathe better. Lately, he found himself more and more interested in the science and technology news. He carefully scanned for any mention of the thing in Central Park. He'd even followed the directions in a YouTube video to set up a search bot that would email him if any articles appeared with the word portal in them. So far, the only results were stories having nothing to do with his desired subject. He knew he was among a tiny minority of people who'd seen the portal at the Heaven's Gate Temple, but he was not the only one. Yet, despite the saying that the internet never forgot, he couldn't find a single image of what he'd watched on TV that night. It was as if some magical force had scoured it from existence. The number of protesters around Heaven's Gate had grown to hundreds of thousands, nearly disabling the Capitol. The press was completely ignorant as to why, but Billy knew better. A few interviews with the protesters made it onto the internet. A few interviews with the protesters made it onto the internet, but none of them made sense to most viewers. There was a strange mixture of quasi-religious fervor over the place being a true gate to heaven and the rightful emperor of China finally returning. The talking heads were postulating the return of emperor worship was almost logical after so many decades of communist rule. Others, experts on Chinese mythology, spoke about the significance of this location for religious revival. None spoke of alien portals, or centaurs. There didn't seem to be much in the world that concerned him besides that. Pakistan was accusing India of developing a doomsday weapon at, of all places, a New Delhi golf course just south of the city center. In Buenos Aires, a riot had been raging for a week. City police and a group described as anarchists were jousting back and forth for control of the eastern district of the city. Seems like the world is discontented, Billy said. Turned the tablet off. He headed down the stairs to go to work, waving at Mr. Nebowitz, who was taking out his garbage. In his unmarked patrol car, he pulled out into traffic. A few hours later, he got back in his car after taking a report on a burglary. Checking his computer, he found something he'd been dreading. There was an outstanding arrest warrant for Victor Leonard Smith. The police wanted Victor for drug possession, a Class C felony. His trial was scheduled January 10th of the following year, and he would be released on his own recognizance pending trial. The complaint section of the warrant said, "Wanted for questioning by federal authorities." He knew they would catch up with him sooner or later, Billy said. He knew him as Prophet Victor, leader of the Overture church. A sun visor and unfolded it and grabbed his microphone. "Able 529 going 10-7 for a bite," he said. 10-4, Able 529, came the dispatcher's reply. It was a little early in the day, but no one micromanaged a detective lieutenant's time. He pulled into traffic and headed north on the Henry Hudson. In a few minutes, he was pulling into the Washington Heights area. The flyer he'd found on his windshield 2 days ago piqued his interest. Followers of the Avatar didn't sound like any street church he'd ever heard of. "Follow us through the portal to heaven," the printing said. The word portal instantly grabbed him. They had several daily outreach spots on street corners that moved every day, but a few days ago they'd opened an actual sanctuary in Washington Heights. As he exited the Henry Hudson, he could see the top of the Cloisters Museum. Reconstructed piece by piece from parts of 5 European abbeys, its tallest tower was visible for miles. He turned down several of the rather tight, angled streets of the district until he found his destination. He had to park a block away. There were far too many cars in the area, most likely due to the followers. As he walked down the sidewalk, he could see he was right. They were everywhere. Nearly 100 followers, with blue scarves wrapped loosely around their necks, crowded the sidewalk. They talked excitedly with whomever they encountered. Some spoke with wild-eyed intensity, while others spoke with simple compassion or even assertiveness. What have I started? Billy wondered. It all went back to his making sure Victor was released on a minor charge. How could this have grown so fast? "Cops are here, Duke," someone yelled. Billy glanced and saw a man with a blue scarf looking at him. His attire was that of a professional businessman. "You got a warrant, cop?" a huge African-American man asked as he approached. Easily 6.5 feet tall, he was built like a professional weightlifter. The long-sleeved shirt he wore stretched over the muscles of his broad chest and thick arms. "I need a warrant to talk to someone?" "If you want to go inside, you do. We got us a lease, all legal like." Billy glanced up at the old historic theater. "I wonder how that will hold up in court." "And who?" "Duke," the man said simply. "And Duke, what kind of God can be found inside?" "The one that waits for us in Central Park. We're just teaching about it here." "Cute. Do I get inside or not?" "Not. Who do you want to see?" "I want to see Victor." The man stiffened. Casually, a group of at least 10 others had slowly disengaged themselves from the crowd and moved into a semicircle around Billy. They formed a clear and obvious barrier between him and the building entrance. "I'm a friend." "The prophet doesn't have any cop friends, at least not current cops." Billy's eyes narrowed slightly at that. "Look, just tell him Lieutenant Billy Harper is here, and I'd like to talk with him." You are Billy Harper? Duke asked. That's my name. Well, shit, man, Duke said and put a massive hand on his shoulder. Why didn't you say so? Come inside. Victor said to let you see him if and you should show up. Billy allowed himself to be steered toward the aging building. The inside of the theater had not changed much from its short stint as a performance arts center. It was a poorly conceived compromise between glitz and glamour. Now it featured a soup line where the faithful fed anyone who showed up hungry. Everyone got a bowl of soup, a sandwich, a can of soda or bottle of water, and a pamphlet. The pamphlet was printed on blue paper and had a drawing of Victor's centaur angel, complete with halo, gesturing toward a portal to heaven. All the servers wore the blue knitted scarf. Can I have one of those? Billy asked a scarf-wearing redhead. He pointed at a stack of pamphlets she carried. She smiled broadly and handed one to him. He thanked her and glanced at it as Duke led him deeper inside. The Avatar of God has delivered the portal to heaven, it read. He shook his head in amazement. It wasn't overly glossy or professional, but it was better than many of the other street ministries managed. They'd come into some money from somewhere, and it sure wasn't from the hungry homeless types they were feeding nearby. This way, man, Duke urged him. He held the door to the main auditorium open, and Billy followed him inside. The main seating area was poorly lit. People filled most of the more than 1,000 seats on the lower level. They ran the gamut from desperate homeless to street punks to the generally well-to-do. There were even a few who might have been borderline famous. Billy thought he saw at least one B-rated movie actor in the crowd. On the stage was the man he sought. Gone was the confused man sitting on the hood of a police cruiser, unsure what had happened or what it meant to him. He strode back and forth on stage, telling how the archangel had flown above the park like a huge ghost as it deposited the angel itself. He talked about the otherworldly visage of the angel and how it had proclaimed itself their savior. But savior from what? The world's doom. His words were well thought out and delivered with a direct sense of purpose. Quite impressive, ain't he? Asked Duke. Ever since we met in the lockup, I've believed. Never before, but he taught me. He doesn't look much like the man I arrested, Billy admitted. How'd he get so good at this? Practice, Duke said. Then after a moment shrugged. That and some instruction from Paul. Paul? Billy asked. He was a priest before. Interesting, Billy thought. He was about to ask more questions when Victor spotted him and quickly wrapped up his sermon. He'd been reading a passage from Psalms and explaining how it was relevant to their current situation. Another man moved to take over the sermon. He was better at it than Victor, though not immensely better. Billy guessed he was Paul. As Billy talked with Duke, another man moved closer and watched him. He was at least 50 and had a certain way of examining Billy that was familiar. More so, the man himself was familiar. Captain Hicks, wasn't it? Billy asked. Once, the man said. Now they call me Gabriel. And you would be Lieutenant Harper, 15th Precinct? 14th, Billy corrected. What's an ex-police captain doing working for this outfit? Believing in something bigger than myself, Gabriel said, leaving Billy shaking his head. You remember my fall from grace? I remember you went on the take, Billy said with a sneer. This is no worse than I deserve, Gabriel admitted. I'm not a cop. Haven't been one for almost 3 years. I understand what's going to happen. If you're smart, you'll understand too and join us. So where's the money coming from for all of this? Billy asked. Surely not from that crowd out front. Most of them probably can't feed themselves every day. No, we're doing that for them. We have our sources. Is this an official investigation, Lieutenant Harper? Not at this point. I'm just here to see Victor as a friend, but there isn't warrant out for him. Instantly, Gabriel's demeanor changed from calm to alert. He looked hard at Billy, then scanned the crowd. Don't worry, I'm the only one who knows he's here, and I haven't reported this location. I'm curious about this game you're playing. Maybe we should grab him, Duke said darkly, if and he's the only one that knows where Victor is. That would be smart, Gabriel said, and Billy nodded. NYPD detective goes missing, all hell would break loose. Nothing of the sort will be happening, Victor said from the edge of the stage. Billy looked up and he smiled hugely. Good to see you again, Lieutenant. You too, Victor, or should I call you Prophet now? Victor is fine, he said, and dropped down gracefully from the stage. I'm a little surprised you made it in here. Many of my disciples are a tad exuberant in their defense of my interests. Are all these people your disciples? Billy gestured across the crowded theater. No, only a few. Gabriel and Duke you already met. There are a few more like Paul who's up there preaching. They're my disciples, my moral guides, too. The others, he gestured at the theater, are believers who have joined the movement. Billy nodded in understanding. So, can I ask why you're visiting us? He says there's a warrant on you, Gabriel said. Victor looked at Billy, who nodded and explained that the feds wanted Victor for questioning. I suspect if they get a hold of you for seeing that alien, Angel, Victor snapped. Okay, whatever, but if they get a hold of you, they'll probably toss you in a hole for a year. There's so much security on that portal you can't get within a quarter of a mile of it. Can you tell me some about that? Duke asked. The bluntness of the question stunned Billy, and he didn't reply for a minute. During his silence, he noticed they were all watching him, and he decided he'd said enough. Look, Victor, I just wanted to give you fair warning about that warrant. Best of luck to you. Then I thank you, Victor said, and offered his hand. Billy shook it without reservation. I'll walk you out, Gabriel said, and he walked ahead to the exit. Out on the street, he nodded to Billy and turned to go back inside. Hicks, Billy said. The former captain turned part of the way around and looked at the young lieutenant. You've got a tiger by the tail here. You know that, right? As I see it, a tiger can take you a long way if you just hang on. And with that, the man was gone. Here's another chapter break. Dr. George Osgood watched the bustle of activity inside the dome and tried to make sense of it. He was still nominally in charge of the research project designed to understand the enigmatic portal. However, the effort was so large, his actual function was akin to that of a coordinator. Making matters worse, the amount of equipment in the dome had increased since the incident 10 days ago. To better facilitate multiple research projects, they abandoned the airlock arrangement and cut 2 more entrances through the spray-crete structure. Osgood didn't know how many personnel had access to the dome, though the NSA guards had tablets that held everyone's clearance level. If you didn't have dome clearance, you'd never get inside. You weren't likely to even get a look, especially since the incident. In the early days, he could tell who was new and who wasn't by the way they looked at the dimly glowing opalescence of the portal dais. Now none of the techs, scientists, or workers gave it so much as a glance. Even stepping on the dais and activating the hovering portal often only resulted in a quick look. Today was one of those rare occasions when the portal was visible from outside. The largest of the newer doors was open as a work crew was carefully maneuvering a scientific apparatus off a heavy hauler and through the doorway. Dr. Osgood watched with some trepidation. While the dais had proved impermeable to any of their attempts to sample it, thereby buttressing the force field theory, who knew what dropping a 5-ton magnetic resonator on it might do? Another machine? Dr. Osgood looked over even though he recognized the voice of Agent Volant. I don't tell you how to trample civil liberties. Don't presume to tell me how to analyze alien artifacts, Dr. Osgood replied. Volant snorted and grinned in appreciation of the jibe. Any sign of Mr. Scott? Volant asked, letting the doctor claim victory for that round. Nothing. Both men regarded the dais, deep in their own thoughts. Since Ben Scott, laser expert, fell through the portal 10 days ago, he'd proved surprisingly adept at surviving in the alien world. There was no longer any doubt that it was alien. The Swiss Army knife Volant had thrown him proved to be a good move. He'd used it to construct a shelter and start a fire, among other things. They couldn't send him anything else. After the portal shut down following the incident, any attempts to throw items through resulted in them sailing out the other side, not transporting to Mr. Scott. Direct communication also proved impossible as no sound came through. They spoke to him via a whiteboard at first and a tablet computer later, held up to the portal. He could reply via words spelled with stones set on the dais for them to read. It was slow, but it was communication. They brought in xenobotanists to examine the plants Mr. Scott presented to them. As they examined them through visual observations and notes, they were unable to make exact pronouncements. After 2 days, Scott decided to cook a meal of several different roasted tubers. He suffered no ill effects. They started a log. Atmosphere, breathable. Biosphere, compatible. Water, plentiful. Not only had it rained on the first day after his arrival, but he had found several small ponds within several hundred yards of the portal. On the second night, he reported that there was a moon appearing quite large and greenish. Then on the third night, there was another moon. This one was quite small, moved quickly, and was nearly black. He'd only seen it when it passed over the first moon. On the fourth morning, he displayed the first animal life, a reptile about a foot long, which bore a distinct resemblance to a terrestrial tokay gecko. He'd caught it eating the remains of his dinner and dispatched it with a rock. Scott took many pictures and dissected the animal with the ever-handy Swiss Army knife, and the scientists took many more pictures from Earth's side. Afterward, he roasted it with more tubers and pronounced it edible. Tastes a little like chicken, he'd written afterward. Despite the situation and his lack of credentials, Ben Scott had become the first intergalactic explorer. The scientists created time schedules and lists of experiments for him. Every morning at sunrise on the alien world, the day was almost exactly, hey, Johnny! The day was almost exactly 23 hours long. They would activate the portal from the Earth side, make contact, and discuss plans. But after the fourth morning, he began repeatedly asking the same question. When was someone else coming over? That's a good question, Dr. Osgood thought. Maybe never, Volant told him. Washington isn't sure how to proceed. They're still concerned this is some sort of invasion or something. Then it's a pretty piss-poor way to run an invasion, Osgood noted. But besides the risks, real or imagined, there was the light. When the portal was active, it had a ring of glowing white lights around its outside edge. Unlike the symbols, the lights didn't move or change, and touching them had no effect. They'd been discounted after a time, at least until Ben Scott went through. The next time someone stepped on the dais and the portal activated, one of the lights turned blue, leaving the other 143 white. While not explicit, the implied meaning was obvious. So they had stalled Scott with excuses that they needed to get authorization, but not to worry. He was doing well, and the world showed no hostile conditions beyond chilly nights. He'd found another smaller lizard that barked a call to others at night if disturbed. Howlers, he called them. There were a few types of insect as well, but none appeared parasitic. They showed interest in the food he prepared, but no interest in eating him. He'd created a simple camp within view of the portal, a lean-to shelter with a raised pallet covered in fern fronds that he changed every night. There didn't appear to be any plant life more advanced than ferns or simple evergreens. He dried some lizard meat for safety's sake and even used skins to create water storage. As the seventh day dawned, he began to venture further away from his camp. On the morning of the ninth day, he was gone from his camp and they could find no sign of him. They initiated an around-the-clock watch. They used telephoto lenses to examine his camp and everything else in sight. Still, there was no visible sign of him. After 2 days, they reduced observations to every 4 hours. We want to send someone else through. Dr. Osgood renewed their request. Not only might Mr. Scott be in dire straits, but the most recent news suggests sending someone else may be more important than ever. Volant grunted. He'd read the same top-secret flash as a scientist. The news, when coupled with the 10 or so portals now positively identified around the world, was, at the very least, ominous. I'll pass the word on up the chain of command, Volant said, and turned to leave. Dr. Osgood watched him go. A little later, Dr. Osgood heard helicopters arriving and ran out in time to see a combat team jumping down from a couple of Blackhawks, carrying huge packs and additional gear. Mark Volant was greeting them and shaking their leader's hand, so he walked toward them. The agent spotted him and waved him over. Dr. George Osgood, this is Lieutenant Colonel Wilson. His team will be your explorers. I thought you were just going to ask, Osgood said as he examined the men and women with their camouflage and big rifles. I did, Volant assured him, and it turns out the decision had already been made. The colonel left Fort Bragg yesterday with his team to prepare. Doctor, the colonel said and held out a hand. Osgood took it somewhat reluctantly. He was sure the soldier could have crushed his hand with ease if he'd chosen to. We'll see if we can find your lost man. Agent Volant, Osgood said, I think it should be a scientist who goes through. Sending soldiers seems contraindicated. The colonel gave Volant a curious look, at which the agent shrugged. The eggheads think the solution to one mistake is to make another, Volant explained. Dr. Osgood, the soldier said, my people are experts in field expedient survival methods and our research assistant qualified. We've been briefed on the current situation. We'll find him and figure out where this portal leads. Another world, Osgood assured him. Some in Washington aren't convinced of that, Volant said. Just because we've seen some strange images of a sky of a different color doesn't mean it's an alien world. Need I remind you of the 23-hour days? Osgood asked. It could all be faked on a soundstage somewhere, Volant suggested. Osgood gawked at him, his face turning red. Recognizing a deteriorating situation, the military man stepped in. I can assure you both we'll get this matter in hand. I'm inclined to agree with the good Dr. Osgood, he said, making a small face at his accidental double use of the word good. All the evidence seems to indicate it's a portal to another world. Still, we're here to get a definitive answer to that. Once we've found the missing man and made sure it's safe, we'll get some of your science boys over there too. Good enough? I suppose so, Osgood said with obvious reluctance. They all went inside the dome. The military team moved back against the wall and made themselves as unobtrusive as possible in the cramped space. They were all keenly observant of their surroundings and reminded Osgood of cats in a room full of mice. "So that's it?" Lieutenant Colonel Wilson asked. "My own personal nightmare," Volant agreed. "And someone's already gone through and survived?" Wilson asked. "You're certain?" "We have video recordings of him alive and well for several days before he disappeared," Osgood assured him. "Then we're good to go." He glanced at his squad, who all in turn nodded their heads in agreement. Osgood glanced at Volant, who also nodded. "Prepare for transition," he said, and once again the science and technical staff exploded into action. Wilson huddled with his team and had a brief but pointed discussion. Osgood wondered which one drew the short straw and was surprised to see the colonel step away from the group and accept a heavily stuffed pack. "You're going yourself?" Osgood said incredulously. "I would never ask my men to do anything I wouldn't be willing to do myself. Frankly, I have more hours on real-world survival situations than any of my team anyway." One of his men handed him a huge rifle, which the colonel expertly examined in quick but minute detail. "There is no evidence of hostile life forms over there," Osgood said, gesturing to the rifle with distaste. "I see no reason for that gun." "Your man over there could have slipped and fallen," the colonel acknowledged. "Or he could have been eaten by a giant space bat. You don't know, and neither do I." He fit a magazine into the rifle's well, drew the bolt back, and let it fly forward with a mechanical clack. He eyed the doctor. "So, if anything decides I'm next on the menu, I'm planning on making myself a difficult meal." The weapon over his shoulder. "Try not to provoke an intergalactic incident," Mark Volant requested. The colonel looked at him with a quizzical gaze, to which Volant gave a little wink, and the two men roared with laughter. "You'll probably be calling me from somewhere in Siberia in a few minutes, for all they know." "I assure you, Colonel, you are about to travel to another world, possibly another galaxy. For all we know, another universe. Or this portal could be a time travel device. We just don't know." "As long as I don't get disintegrated, I'll deal with it," the soldier said and mounted the dais. The portal sprang to life. "Let's get this show on the road." The team rushed in and began piling plastic hard cases on the dais. The colonel's trip was practical as a rescue mission, but it was also an opportunity to perform an experiment. When Scott had fallen through, Volant was able to toss him the knife. Later, when the portal was activated again, nothing could go through. Now they wanted to test the boundaries of that theory. The people in charge of the various groups signaled their readiness, and Osgood addressed the colonel. "Ready when you are, Colonel Wilson. Just step through." "Easy for you to say," the soldier muttered under his breath and approached the portal. It looked solid, though it had not been there before he stepped on the dais. He reached out and touched the strange flowing symbols. There was no sensation from them, though they did move in response to his hand. On the other side was what looked like a forest glade, though the trees looked like something out of an old dinosaur movie. The sky had a slightly different spectrum of light. It was just like he'd seen in the briefings. "Okay, men," the colonel said to the 8 men who stood a short distance away. "If I do not appear to have made it safely, you are not to follow me through. Is that clear?" They nodded their understanding. "Good. Good luck," Volant said. Lieutenant Colonel Wilson nodded and stepped through. Thrum went the portal, and it turned azure blue, just like before, then back to milky white again. The energy analysts recorded data and babbled excitedly. Lieutenant Colonel Wilson stood on the other side of the portal. He looked around at his surroundings for a moment, then turned to glance back at those on the other side. Everyone watched him expectantly, though none more than the remaining soldiers. They could see him take several deep breaths and shrug convincingly. He took out the 10-inch tablet he'd brought and wrote on it, "No sign of ET." Several people laughed, even Osgood. The team picked up the first crate and approached the portal. On the other side, Wilson unslung his rifle and descended the stairs, sweeping the clearing with his eyes and the weapon's muzzle. The team tossed the first crate into the portal, and it flew through, rolled down the stairs, and landed at the soldier's feet. He glanced down at it and then back up to see another crate on the way. To avoid being clobbered, he moved toward the missing Mr. Scott's lean-to. "Any spikes as the crates go through?" Osgood called. "Negative," came the immediate reply. "Nothing since the subject transitioned." "That mean anything?" Volant asked. "Could mean it's a wormhole or something. We don't know." "When will you know?" Osgood shrugged. "I don't know." Volant cursed and watched as the soldiers tossed more crates. The hard plastic crates were numbered in bright red on the side, and a detailed inventory was kept, including their weight down to the ounce. When the soldiers threw crate number 11, it landed with a crash on the floor, still in New York. "Log it," Osgood called. "What's the tally?" "About 450 pounds, someone replied. "Just under 250 kilograms, Osgood noted. "That's a lot," Volant noted. "Depends," Osgood replied. On It says, oh, what? It's supposed to say, on what? Does that factor in the weight of the man and what he carried? How do we find out? Send another, Osgood said. Despite the men standing on the dais where another 5 crates remained, the portal disappeared. They had to climb off the dais. As I noted previously, unstable connection, what the heck? As they noted previously, the portal had remained open for 10 minutes before it had needed to be fact for future use. He also noted that 2 of those 144 crystals were now glowing blue. It was a counter, of that he had no doubt. The colonel had taken several communication devices, including a simple cell phone, a high-gain military-grade transceiver, and even a tiny VLF transmitter used by downed aviators. Over the course of an hour and 6 resets of the portal, they tested them all and found none could send a signal through the portal. That's disappointing, Osgood mused. So we're limited to posting on a computer screen? Bowen asked, and gestured at the display set up nearby. There might be a workaround, but for now I think we can send the rest of the team. Bullet nodded, and the team moved pallets of plastic crates into place. The next man to go worked his shoulders and neck around like he was getting ready for a fight. His eyes were bright and observant, but he wasn't sweating. Having seen for himself the alien device hadn't vaporized his commander, or that he hadn't been eaten by a huge flying shark on their side, he was ready. When he activated the portal, Wilson was waiting there and waved him through. He went with no hesitation and arrived on the other side. The soldiers moved out of the way, and crates began to fly. The 7th crate didn't go through. 390 pounds, the technician said. What was the next crate's weight? 40 pounds. Osgood nodded. What does it mean? Bullen asked. With all his gear, the soldier weighed 25 pounds less than the colonel. It means what he carries doesn't count toward the total. He addressed the equipment team again. Please assemble a crate as close to 250 kilograms as possible without exceeding it and prepare for the next transition. It took a little extra time to set up the next soldier's load, so Wilson wrote on his tablet that they'd be back when the time was right, and they left to explore. An hour later, the exact load was ready, as was the next soldier. He resettled his rifle in its sling and eyed the dais somewhat suspiciously as he stepped up, and the portal came to life. On the other side, there was no sign of the other soldiers. What do you think, Sarge? He asked the non-commissioned officer waiting with the others. Go, he said quickly. He nodded and stepped through, moving out of the way as the crate team moved up and started tossing the containers through. In only a minute, they finished. Osgood picked up a 2-pound weight from the equipment bench and mounted the stairs. From just a few feet away, he lobbed the weight at the portal. It sailed through and clattered to the floor of the dome. I'd call that confirmation, Osgood said with a nod. The portal shut down after 10 minutes elapsed, right on time. Off to the side, Mark Volant was typing the last of his report into his smartphone while the 5th soldier prepared to go over. Osgood spent the time talking excitedly with technicians and other scientists. Proceeding as planned, a pair of technicians mounted the dais, which made the portal reappear. Lieutenant Colonel Wilson was standing directly in front on the other side, a message displayed on the computer tablet he held up. Halt operations, it said. Osgood immediately started typing his reply. What happened? He asked. The colonel didn't type a reply. He just held up a shoe. The shoe was a cross trainer, unlike the army boots the soldiers all wore. It was covered in blood. Several people gasped around the room. I guess we know why Mr. Scott disappeared, Volant said. As he began to amend his report, he noted that the foot still appeared to be in the shoe. All right, there's a chapter break, and we're going to stop there since it's been about 44 minutes. Once again, this has been Worldmaker Books, reading EarthSong Overture by Mark Wandry. This was reading number 4. We will keep going every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday at 8 p.m. Eastern until we are through the book. So at a couple of points here, we'll be giving away signed copies. As we get closer to those, we'll let you know how to enter for that. And we'll see you again Thursday night. Thanks, everybody. Bye.